Today we've got a really fascinating opening plenary. We have several exciting stakeholders from across the cell and gene therapy space. We are joined by Terry Perovlakis for a fireside chat. We're joined by Lynn Fischer for a fireside chat around the investment landscape and also the Women in Advanced Therapies session that I hope many of you were able to attend yesterday. I think that's the most people we've ever had for the Women in Advanced Therapies session. And similarly for the investment summit, it was the best attended we've had that so far. I really hope that you'll continue to enjoy that over the coming years. So I'm very excited for today's opening plenary. I'm particularly excited for this panel. We are joined by some very exciting stakeholders from across the cell and gene therapy space, both on the cell and the gene therapy side. And I am particularly excited to welcome you to Advanced Therapies Week. We have a very exciting agenda. We have 7 different tracks going on. I realize that I've made this as complicated as possible for all of you and made some really horrendous decisions for you to make across the next couple of days as to what sessions you would like to go to. So enjoy that. Enjoy figuring that out on the app as well. If you do need any print agendas, let me know and we'll try and work that out for you. But the app is pretty comprehensive. This week is going to be full on. I hope you've got lots of meetings booked in. I know that there are over 3,000 meetings booked in across the entire event, across all of you. I think that might all be me, actually, across the next couple of days. But again, thank you so much for joining us. And I will be very excited to welcome Sarah Creviston to the stage to chair our opening plenary session.
Well, good morning and welcome, everyone. And first of all, I would just like to congratulate any of the Ohio State Buckeye fans who won the national championship last night, and console the Notre Dame and the Michigan fans for that win. But what a thrill to be here, and thank you for the opportunity. I feel like this is the opening plenary, but I feel like we've already been really deep into the conversations, starting last night, as Ryan said, on the investor panel and what's happening in the trends, and an amazing conversation about how our women can be viewed as investable. And we're gonna have extended panel in doing that. But first, we're going to kick off with one of my very good friends, Susan Nichols, who is currently the CEO of Propel Biosciences, and where she leads a team who supports business development, drug development, and fractional C-suite needs of cell and gene therapy companies. Propel also has a technology currently in stealth mode, and this is incredibly valuable for Susan to share her insights. And if you follow her on LinkedIn or other platforms, I always learn a lot. She shares the greatest updates. So she's going to give us an overview of what's happening in the industry. Susan?
Good morning. This is my favorite time of the year because I get to look back on the prior year and see how far we've come. 4 years of a bear market, but the sun was shining at JP Morgan. I take that as a good omen for 2025. What better indication do you need? Not only was the weather sunny, but JPM kicked off with Tune announcing $175 million Series B for epigenetic editing to the clinic. Bayer's Parkinson's disease cell therapy is moving into late-stage testing in a phase 3 for an allogeneic cell therapy in the neurodegenerative space. And I think what's really interesting is neuro emerging really instead of an indication as a category in pharma pipelines. And I'm going to start by laying the foundation for the top 10 this year. This was really hard. So instead of thinking about the ranking, I want to think about the milestones because it really was a milestone year. A year of incredible progress. 10 approvals for cell and gene therapy. We have 3,000 drug developers now, 2,000 clinical trials, $15.2 billion in total investment. Tim Hunt shared this at the ARM State of the Industry. Here's what I love. 650 clinical trials in solid tumor and 2 solid tumor approvals in 2024. And I love when people say, oh, that was so quick. It's like a 40-year success. And I think we should acknowledge that. I'm going to be rainbows, kittens, and unicorns because that's who I am, but I'll have a good dose of reality in here too. We're going to be like a children's soccer team where everybody gets a participation prize. Because it's not a competition for numbers, but a celebration of the culmination of so many dedicated individuals, supportive and aligned investors, and teams who have mastered the agility training needed to be first. For those of you who have gone first, that's the hardest position in this industry. So weight is incredibly equal this year, and it's a year of foundation. These early pioneers had to slog through the regulatory landscape, manufacturing, reimbursement, not to mention physician education and patient education. They're the way pavers. It's with deep gratitude and an honor to have them recognized today. And I think we can agree that it's easier to learn a lot from other people's mistakes than it is to be the first one. So let's get to it. Some of these slides are a little bit chewy this year, I will warn you, because there's just a lot of content. There was a lot that happened. So let's recap last year. So in 2023, the number 1 was global patient access. Number 2 was the CRISPR therapy approvals. 3, pharma dominating M&A and partnerships. 4, pharma fueling enabling technology. 5, CGT development in emerging markets. 6, CMO industry with high profile acquisitions. 7, cell therapy space faces growing pains. 8, rare disease benefits in 2023. 9, FDA collaboration accelerating. And 10, CGT showing promise in autoimmune disease. I'm going to start by thanking my contributors. A lot of them are phone a friend. Ask Audrey, Lee, Mark, Spencer, Spen, who spent hours on the phone debating what goes on this list and making sure that it provides the highest value, and I thank you. I thank Nicola Ambler and Stacy Johnson because they are kind enough at the last minute to proof the slide deck. Number 10, a milestone for MSC therapies. FDA approval of mesoblast therapy for pediatric graft versus host disease. I've been in the industry 15 years, and they were one of the first companies I remember seeing their presentation. And this was not an easy lift. Twice the FDA declined, saying they needed more efficacy data and additional clinical trial data. And luckily, they were able to convince the FDA to take the long-term data on the high-risk pediatric patients that they were concerned about as they agreed to conduct a trial in adults. Also, I think we all followed closely to see what the agency was saying in regards to potency assays. 9, regenerative medicine milestone. So Humacyte has an off-the-shelf bioengineered blood vessel. They are local to me in North Carolina, and I love the automation that they created to make this a reality. They have been at this quite some time also, and this is for patients who need urgent revascularization to prevent losing a limb. So time is of the essence, and it's allogeneic, so there's no donor matching, infection resistant, and I really think it's been a while since we heard anything in the regenerative medicine space that is really game-changing, and this is. Of course, the military has high hopes for this too, because it can be used in trauma situations, and it combines innovation with accessibility. Sickle cell access milestone. Now, we talked about this as #1 last year, and in the US, CMS has enabled Medicare and CHIP to cover sickle cell disease and related services in a value-based agreement. I want to take a second for those non-US. So Medicaid and CHIP are the low-income federal health care. CHIP covers children from birth to age 18, and Medicaid picks up after that. Then there's Medicare that comes on top of that. So this also offers genetic counseling, outcome-based agreements that they can adopt on a state level. For states and the federal government, it allows them to have budget predictability and improved access so that these patients in an underserved community, if they choose to have a gene therapy, that the payment methods are available. Decentralized manufacturing model advances. So Europe saw data from a phase 1 study by Galapagos that shows early results for patients with relapsed or refractory non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. In the US, this is the first IND clearance for decentralized manufacturing. And this is fresh, fit-for-purpose cells delivered within 7 days. So this decentralized manufacturing model, I don't know about the rest of you, but it felt a little far off when it first was talked about and has been gaining much attention. And to me, what really, stands out here is the way they thought through this. They partnered with Landmark Bio in Boston and Thermo Scientific in a collaboration. They have a partnership with Blood Centers of America to have access to their network with the centralized management and support for consistent quality of materials. And they announced the first tech transfer to the Blood Center of America site, Excellis in San Diego. So to me, there's action now and a basis for how we start decentralization. The FDA is very engaged with ARM and Nimble through an FDA scientific exchange. All those who attended said that it was really valuable and that the FDA is very open to these conversations in helping us as an industry figure out what decentralized manufacturing and regulatory requirements mean. First FDA approval, TCR gene therapy for solid tumors. Adaptimmune has the T-cell receptor gene therapy, and really, this is synovial sarcoma. And we have all been waiting for the first group of solid tumor therapies to come across the line, and this is the year. TIL therapy was the first with Iovance for melanoma. And I can remember when this came across. And I was sitting at my desk, and I was kidding. I was telling Phil Bannock that I think that I heard Etta James singing At Last, right? Because we've all been waiting for the first approval. And now the real work starts. CAR-T autoimmune investment. Let's face it, autoimmune is hot. In 2024 and carrying into 2025, as we get more and more data and more market confidence in the ability to treat these larger patient populations. Kyverna Therapeutics, $367 million upsize IPO for lupus. Arsenal Bio, $325 million Series C. Again, autoimmune and oncology. BMS is a partner as well as a Genentech collaboration. And Cataletta Bio is positive clinical data. That was all the buzz. So autoimmune will be super interesting for us all to track from an investment perspective, from a data readout, and from a patient adoption, because we heard a little bit yesterday too about we're now entering a really competitive space because it's not just cell and gene therapy, we're in the entire biotech market. Expanded access. Now, my good friend Mark Flower and I were reviewing my slide, and my slide was terrible. So what you're seeing right now is Mark's research. And the point is, for Kymriah, for Yescarta, for Carvykti, for Breyanzi, I don't have to go over point by point. But expanded access means that we have the ability to treat more patients, that the FDA is comfortable now with what's out there on the market. They're comfortable with the efficacy. They're comfortable with the safety. It's getting reimbursed. So this is huge from my perspective, to just starting to treat broader patient populations. Novartis buys Kate for $1.1 billion. Neuromuscular disease, including DMD and limb-girdle muscular dystrophy. This leverages Kate's platform in next-generation capsids and delivery systems. Collaboration, Novartis has a collaboration with Legend Bio. Again, $100 million upfront, potential milestones up to $1 billion. For CAR T therapies in the neuro space. And a licensing agreement with PTC Therapeutics for $1 billion upfront and $1.9 billion in milestone payments. Novartis is playing big. Thank you, Novartis. But this just shows the confidence Big Pharma has in our ability, not only for science, but the commercial opportunities also. And we'll end with Roche, strategic investment and partnerships. Poseida acquisition, $1.5 billion. 2022, they invested $110 million upfront for 2 cell therapies. 2024 collaboration with Dinopain, $50 million. For AAV vectors for gene therapy. And just a reminder, they are one of the investors in Adaptimmune for $150 million for their off-the-shelf solid tumor treatment. So Roche came in, put some money in, helped to fuel that growth stage, and then came in and isn't it every biotech's dream to be bought by Roche, Novartis, Pfizer? So there's the top 10 for this year. And there's 3 things I really want to call forth. I'll start with the commercial drug development progress. Please stop asking me if CGT is here to stay. I get these calls all the time. Susan, do you think CGT is here to stay? First of all, I hope so, because it's my career. As Tim Hunt disclosed in the State of the Industry, 13 out of 15 big cap pharma companies are in. We have 5 blockbuster drugs with revenue in excess of $500 million. Again, a really compelling commercial opportunity. The first TILS therapy is set to do $500 million in the first 12 months. 68% of Zolgensma revenue is outside the US, which speaks to the ability not only to have a US market, but the global market. And more importantly, access. So hats off to Novartis for investing in the access model early and often. And CGT globally is of increasing importance in the larger biotech market. I want to touch on decentralized manufacturing because it's polarizing, and I love polarizing topics. At ARM JPM briefing, Dr. Peter Marks and Lynn, who's president of cell therapy at BMS, both brought up some great observation and learnings. Still, 2 in 10 CAR T patient candidates receive one of the 6 CAR T therapies on the market. Why? Again, we talked about this. Efficacy and safety are established. Manufacturing has improved. Even the hasty black box warning labels are being reconsidered by the FDA due to data submitted and deeper interpretation. But we know patients don't like to leave home and spend 4 weeks in an academic institution. 99% of all adverse events happen in the first 2 weeks. So the question is, can we teach community hospitals the protocols to treat CAR T patients and manage any adverse events? Because community support is very important for a family's healing. And let's talk about the pink elephant in the room. Let's talk about the physician comfort and education. Physicians have deep relationships with their patients, and they want to keep them close. They're very reluctant to send them to an academic institution. First of all, because they're vested in their patients. Second, they're afraid they're not going to get them back. So there's no judgment there. We just have to understand what the barriers are and work collaboratively to address them. So community-based systems appear to be a compelling solution. BMS disclosed that they had their first community practice treat CAR T patients, so we know it's possible. I'll end with kind of a call for action. We invite those back who are currently sitting on the sidelines with wads of cash, thinking, where should I invest? Because we know the numbers. Y'all have wads of cash. It would give me, personally, and just about everyone in this room, great joy to introduce you to tools, technologies, service providers, drug developers with some really interesting next generation technologies. So feel free to reach out. And you know what model you should invest in? All of them. I do not see a time where CDMOs do not exist. I do not see a time when we don't have centralized, decentralized, and remember, rainbows, kittens, and unicorns, right? Point of care. Because we will get there. We're on our way there. But all these will coexist. And I'll end with this. I hope 2025 is a year of access. Access brings sales. Sales drives investment and M&A. As Anthony Davis pointed out last night, the new benchmark is reimbursement, patient adoption, and physician confidence. Good science meets good commercial planning and execution. Southern expression, winner, winner, chicken dinner. I'll leave you with that.
Thank you, Susan. It's so encouraging to take a moment and look back at what actually has really been accomplished, because we're all so driven to go forward and fight barriers and look at how we can make things better and different, and that's all what we're here to do. But it's incredibly encouraging, and thank you for the shout out on Novartis, being a part of Novartis. being a part of launching Zolgensma, one of the first gene therapies over the last 5 years, I can tell you that we've learned a lot. We've learned a lot from the clinical and the execution, the commercial, and getting the system set up in order to find and treat patients around the world. And as you can see, I'm very excited for Novartis to be engaging, and we're not on the sidelines, and doing very strategic investments in cell and gene therapy because we have learned a lot, and striking very strategic partnerships are invaluable going forward. And part of that investment is actually who's on your team. And we said yesterday, we had one of the largest gatherings of women for the conference that we've had to date. And it was so impressive. And I have to say, if you're looking to really drive your business, build your business, or diversify your teams, they're here. They're in the room. So please network and meet them, because if you want technical expertise, business expertise, science expertise, they're here. And it's such an opportunity. So we're gonna learn more. And so our next fireside chat, I think they call them fireside chat, so we just feel warmer during the day. So we're gonna have welcome up Becky Johnson-Kent, who's the head of the Women in Advanced Therapies and has done a fantastic job at building this network. In a conversation with Lynn Fischer, Chief Executive Officer of KMAK Capital. Ladies.
Thank you, everyone. For those of you that were able to join us in Women in Advanced Therapies yesterday, we were discussing the power of investing in women specifically. But as Susan sort of ended on briefly there, I mean, just invest in everything. So we're going to slightly sort of broaden the conversation to briefly touch upon some of those investment discussions that we had yesterday. A stat that a lot of people have come up to me following my welcome address yesterday was that only 2% of VC funding goes into female-founded companies. So we're not going to touch upon that, but Lynn, I'm sure many of you know, but last year we had a conversation together when she was still under the Title 21 umbrella, which Lynn founded, but now she has set up her own family office, KMAK Capital. So Lynn is very well placed to literally discuss both sides of the coin. So Lynn, we'll start by saying, obviously going from one side to now, being an investor yourself, what drove you to do that, and tell me a little bit about sort of the kind of investments that you're making, as much as you can.
Yeah, sure. I'll tell you everything I can, which is, first of all, thank you so much, Becky, for all you do for women, men, and everybody in this industry. You really are a visionary, and I appreciate you so much. We've come a long way, baby, as an industry. Pay no attention to the stats, the small percentages. If you're a woman, if you're a minority, on the funding, pay no attention. Be that 1%, be that 2%, who cares? That just means you need to present to a lot more people. I never expected to get in the room. And if I wasn't invited in the room, then I figured maybe that's not the right room. So I encourage everyone to keep going. I spent the last week at JP Morgan, like many of you have, and the whole ethos, the vibe, and I spent 30 years in the Bay Area, so I am partial to the Silicon Valley, the real stuff, not the fake it stuff, but the vibe is positive now. And I was fortunate enough to be included in some rooms that were quite unexpected. I was invited to hear Jamie Dimon speak to about 100 women in healthcare. But really, and it was very insightful. He was very frank about things. And he said, if you don't like the healthcare industry, if you don't like what's happening in biotech, you want funding, you got to change it. You got to be the change and get involved. But what drove KMAK Capital into existence, it actually The start of it happened right in Miami with you. When at the end, you were talking about what do you predict, what are your hopes? And I gave a little bit of a prediction because I'm a marketer and strategist by trade, so I can't help myself, but to try to predict the future, not to say my crystal ball is any better than anybody else's. It's just my guess. But I said something, I said, I want to see more women and minorities on the cap table. And not because it's a quota or not any of that. No, because they've earned it. I want to see super competent people win. I want to see good business, good science, good therapies get to the patient. If it doesn't get to the patient, it doesn't count. And if you can't commercialize it and get it to the patient in Africa, okay, global patient access, affordability is important. So I made this statement, I want to see more women and minorities on the cap table. And so for 3 months, as all my friends close to me, my family, even the industry said, go away, Lynn, go to the beach. You don't have to worry about this anymore, you check the box. And I thought a lot about it. And I'm like, wait a minute, that's not how I've lived my life. I want to give back to the community who was so kind to me and my team to teach us cell and gene therapy. I'm not a scientist. I'm just a businesswoman. I'm a marketer. And so I'm like, hey, let's start helping and hearing these stories and bridging. And so we actually allocated a portion of our portfolio to alternatives. And we are investing in life sciences. Now, we prefer lower the risk, later stage. But we've also broken our own rules. And we've invested in Siren Biotechnologies. Nicole Powell, who I was thrilled to see, helped out on that Susan's top 10 list. Because she's got incredible research to help cure glioblastoma. And I know that's a bold statement, but that means something. And at KMAK Capital, we say, okay, we've got other investments that are doing very well. Why wouldn't we risk? Why wouldn't we risk? And worst case, how do you feel? And everyone on our investment committee agreed to this. How would you feel if that was a goose egg at the end? We'd still feel really good. Why? Because anything that fails is the precursor to success. My life is filled with more failures than successes. I just didn't ever stop.
Thank you. And I mean, again, we're not here to talk about, investments in gender, but what advice or, you've been very open in obviously the discussions that we've had and, obviously here on stage, being very open in terms of your investments. I know that people are, in fact, you actively encourage people to reach out to you. What advice would you give to have a successful investment pitch, whether that be with you or, other investors, because ultimately money makes the world go round. So, what would be sort of a key piece of advice coming from an investor that would make you successful in a pitch or indeed choosing an investor to work with?
That's a great question. We're still learning through the process. We see some good pitches, we see some not so good pitches, but more than anything, take the science, take whether you're preclinical, clinical, whatever stage, talk about the end, talk about your vision, talk about your exit. And I know that seems really crass because most of you in this room are doing it. You would have to do what you do for the patient, but there has to be, to make it sustainable, there has to be a market for it, there has to be a business for it. The sooner you test your love, your science project, your baby, your hobby, your brilliant idea that you've been spending 10, 20 years on, the faster you test it in the market, the sooner you're going to know if you've got something, or more importantly, you'll be able to pivot slightly or refine. So the decks that we like to see are short and sweet. Talk about the science in a way somebody like me can understand it. I'm not a PhD. You can have lots of other things in your data room, to explain it. But give me the top line. What are your challenges? But the most important thing, because there's a lot of great science, you all have done an incredible job while there's been a lull in investment to get better, to work leaner, meaner, advance the science. Make sure that you communicate the business, make sure you communicate the challenges, make sure you communicate the total addressable market, but not just the total addressable market, the total attainable market. And there's a huge difference. I'm in stealth working on a global issue of diabetes. It's terrible what's, the increases in the diabetes. Trust me, it's not a glib one. Novartis has got that. Sarah's, or Eli Lilly, and they've got that done, and Novo Nordisk. But the global problems, it's not just, okay, we're going to get every patient everywhere in the world an affordable diabetes management device, but what can we actually attain? What can we actually attain? And how are you going to do it? And how are you going to go to market? And what have you done early in your life? Have you attracted some strategics? A great Silicon Valley trick is to get a couple strategics to buy into your business, 5, 10%, multiple, and create a market. And that happens all the time. But there's a lot that can be done, but refine the pitch, ask for feedback. And investors in the room, I ask you, you're invested in this industry, take the time to give the feedback and tell them how they can make it better and what it would take. We always tell them, hey, we say no to a lot of people. And it's painful because we're founders. But we're empathetic about it, and we'll say, but just from our standpoint, here are a couple things you could do that might help. And then we'll do everything we can to introduce them to other family offices, endowments, whatever it may be, VCs, angels, private equity, that it may be more appropriate for them.
Perfect, thank you. I think that's all we've got time for, so like your desired pitch deck, short and sweet. But I know that Lynn has asked me to sort of let you all know that if anyone is interested in speaking to Lynn about anything, then she's very open to having those discussions, whether it be about investment or anything else. So please do reach out to her and she'll be happy to have the conversation. So thank you so much, Lynn.
Thank you, Becky, and thank you all for the great work you're doing for the patient. Keep going. It's full steam ahead. I think better days are ahead. Thank you.
Thank you, Lynn and Becky. And Lynn, I just want to emphasize what you said. I think we have learned, and what we strive for every day at Novartis is your ability to pivot your program is directly linked to how close you are with your patients and getting their insights as early as possible, because they're actually the experts living with the disease, the patients, and their families. Which leads us to our next fireside chat. So Ryan is going to have a conversation with Terry Pirovalakis. He's Chief Executive Officer of Alpida Therapeutics, and he's also the father of Michael, who actually, when we were preparing for the panel, we actually got to meet virtually, and he's absolutely the reason of why we get to do what we do. So I want to welcome up Ryan and Terry. Thank you.
My first question really is, I love the name Alpida Therapeutics. I'm a total Helenophile. What's behind the name for you?
Yeah, so my background is, I live in Toronto, so hopefully we're not going to be the 51st state, that's, but who knows. What happened was, as we were going down the journey to save my son and the other children, we were trying to think of a name for the drug for my son, and we called it Melpida. And my background is Greek. My parents are from Greece. And Alpida means hope in Greek. And the M was Michael, so we called it Michael's Hope. And then when we created the company, we were trying to think of the name, and we came up with just Alpida, hope for the children that we can hopefully save from these terrible diseases.
Excellent. And can you go into a little bit of your background and why you started the company?
Yeah, so I spent 20 years in strategy and innovation in IT, completely outside this field. And on April 2nd of 2019, my youngest son, Michael, was diagnosed with a disease called spastic paraplegia type 50. They told us, go home, love him. He'll be paralyzed from the waist down by the age of 10. He'll be quadriplegic by the age of 20. He'll never walk and never talk. He'll have severe seizures. And all you really can do is just give him the best life possible. We went home that night, and I collapsed in the street, and my neighbors came and picked me up. And I decided at that point in time, me and my wife, that we had to change the life of Michael and these other children. So the next day, I liquidated our life savings, and I started researching as much as I humanly could, because I knew this wouldn't be a cheap endeavor. We were fortunate enough to find an amazing team here in Dallas at UTSW. A lot of people actually in the room today. They made us a gene therapy. Dr. Stephen Gray and Dr. Xin Chen and their team made us a gene therapy. We raised $4.5 million in Toronto and around the world through 20,000 donations, golf tournaments, galas. After the therapy was made, we then did toxicology at the same time of doing the proof of concept. We did manufacturing while we were doing toxicology, so it took a lot of financial risk. And then in March of 2022, my youngest son, Michael, was treated with the gene therapy that we created. We decided that we had to do more. We just couldn't just sit around and let the other children, succumb to this fate. So 90 days after Michael was treated, thanks to this amazing team of people that were helping us, we opened up a phase 1/2 here in Dallas, Texas. We treated 6 children so far. The 7th child will be treated in a couple of weeks. They're actually here right now doing assessments. And what happened was, I was trying to give this program away. I was going to companies, I was going to institutions, and I was basically saying, here's the license, here is the program, here's drug product, please save these children. And because there's only about 100 children in the world, there's just no interest. So we decided that we had to do something more. So I quit my job, and we created a company called Alpida Therapeutics. Thankfully funded by 2 amazing philanthropists, Sheila McHale and Javier Garcia of Columbus Children's Foundation and Foundation Columbus. We hired a team, which my team is here today as well. And we took on a second program called Charlotte Mary Tooth 4J, funded by CIRM in California, partnered by the Bespoke Gene Therapy Consortium at the NIH. And since then, we've actually are working on 4 additional programs, all of which are ultra rare, no one wants them, and we're just trying to save these children.
So your team are talking about this over the next couple of days across the agenda, but can you talk a little bit about the business model for Alpida? I mean, it's so different from what we're used to with biotech.
Yeah, so when we created Alpida Therapeutics, we really wanted to make a difference in the world. And, coming from a completely different background, I looked at this model of trying to do a phase 1, a phase 2, a phase 3, and then getting into getting to approval, and then requiring access. And I thought, why is this so difficult? Why do we have to do this path, for an ultra-rare condition, specifically for an ultra-rare condition? Why do we have to doom this generation of children to never receive a therapy? So, our team was able to look differently into the process. And because of our philanthropic funding, we were able to run like a nonprofit. And the goal is that we take these programs, we run them to commercialization. access, get it to as many children as we can, and then we take that revenue either through a PRV voucher or through the licensing, and we put it back into saving more children, doing more diseases where there's an unmet need, where programs are considered unviable. And I think what would happen was, if you were to go back 6 years when I first started here, you could take any gene therapy and have funding. I think the temperature in Dallas this week shows that we're in an Arctic winter of biotech. And I hope that kind of changes things in the next couple of months or years so that we can go back to saving these children, getting more therapies out there, because having 10 is amazing. Having 1,000 would then bring the cost down, bring more innovation, and save more children.
Excellent. You're now working in 6 indications. Fantastic.
We're working on 6, and then we're helping probably, I don't know, 50 to 100 other ones on the side between our team, just because these families have nowhere to go. There's amazing companies and institutions working and helping these families on the side, but it's not an easy path. It's very extremely difficult.
And coming from outside the space, what were the biggest surprises for you, and then what were the biggest challenges that you found in starting this company and in operating in this space?
Yeah, I would say the first week I actually hated pharmaceutical companies. It was kind of like, oh my God, why aren't they helping save our children? But then I realized that that these assets are so small. There's so many assets, and that people that work in these amazing companies really want to help us, and that's what really changed my perspective. And now we have great partnerships with almost the largest pharmaceutical companies out there in biotechs. But I just found that it was extremely difficult because there's so much potential. We have all these amazing technologies and therapies that are ready to be seen, but there's a lack of government funding. There's a lack of financial funding, like VC funding, that is not in this 10 times space that can allow us to be expediting these therapies for these patients and children.
So what do you see that the future of alpha therapeutics being over the next couple of years?
Well, we're just trying to survive at this point. It's an extremely difficult market right now, but our goal is to turn 5 programs into 20 programs, 20 programs into 100, 100 into 1,000, and keep going so we can continue saving these ultra-rare conditions. Just to put in perspective, this year alone, or last year, to put in perspective, we had 40 companies or 40 different programs come to us, either drug manufactured, toxicology completed, some path beyond just proof of concept, saying we are stuck, we've run out of money, our company is going to go bankrupt, or our board has decided that we're not going to take this program forward, and drop them. It's some of the largest pharmaceutical companies out there, and it's not not from the willpower. It's just that there's a numbers game here, and it's such a terrible thing in one program actually. Drug was made, IND was filed, and children were selected, and then the company went bankrupt. So I think we really have to look differently. We have to say, how do we bring these therapies to market as quickly as possible so that these things don't happen? How do we backload costs? Not doing GMP product up front and validating the potency assay up front and spending $20 million. How do we get product into the clinic, show efficacy, backload the cost so the risk is limited at the beginning so that more companies can move programs forward?
What would be your wider hope for the gene therapy industry?
I think one thing that we do have is luckily we have an amazing partner at the FDA with Dr. Marks. I think we're blessed to have him, and hopefully he stays there in this new administration. But I think what we need to do is we just need to get more programs into the clinic. We need to collaborate together more closely. I think that when we talk about what was the biggest shock to me when I came into this field was the lack of collaboration. When we had a meeting for our disease, and it was like, well, this team can't come because they're working on the same, cell biology as this team. It's like, are we serious? We should be working together and try to figure out how we move things forward. I think that was the biggest disappointment, I'm going to call it, that I came into the field, because, we're not in competition with each other. We're all there's 10,000 rare diseases. There's enough out there for all of us. So we're not really in competition with each other. We're just trying to just get these moving. And I think we need to have more collaboration and talk about like Lynn was saying, the wins and the losses, because they're important, and losses are lessons learned. They're not losses.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much, and it's a real pleasure to finally have you on the Advanced Therapies Week stage. So.
Thank you very much for having me. It's an honor. Yeah.
So we're going to move to, I'm really excited about this next panel, the conversation. We've got just a really stellar group of people. So we're going to have Kathy High, who's the visiting professor from Rockefeller University, but that's like just looking at an iceberg. She is an amazing pioneer who's been a part of incredible Spark Therapeutics and Luxturna and in government service and advisory. And so I really can't wait to hear her perspectives. We've got Ignacio Nunez, who is the Chief Operating Officer of CellReady, who also was a worked at Novartis and made an incredible impact. Terry's going to stay up with us, and Boro Dropulik, who's the Executive Director of Caring Cross. Great. Well, it's great to see all you in person. We had a very good conversation on the phone getting ready for this conversation. And just to build on Susan's top 10 accomplishments and the trends that are happening in the industry, we talked about all the great things that are moving forward. We're also, so as we go, please introduce yourself and then just address what you see are some of the barriers going forward for our industry in terms of your own perspective, and where do you see that we need to still keep working? We could start with Kathy.
Okay, so my name is Kathy High. I spent most of my career in academia at the University of Pennsylvania, the Children's Hospital of Philadelphia, where our work in gene therapy was supported by the Howard Hughes Medical Institute and the NIH. In 2013, I co-founded Spark Therapeutics, and I worked there until 2020. We, as you heard from our panel moderator, Sarah, from Sarah, Spark actually led the first approval of a gene therapy for genetic disease by the FDA. That was for Luxturna, which is a rare form of blindness. And we also did the phase 1/2 studies for what is now Becvez for hemophilia B, which is marketed by Pfizer. I worked for a couple of years for Sheila McHale, who was mentioned by somebody else here, at AskBio, where I was the president of therapeutics. And then I was a visiting professor at Rockefeller. And most recently, I've accepted a position as CEO of Regaze, AG, which is a gene therapy company focused on a novel treatment for blindness. So, go right into what I see as barriers?
Yes.
I'm excited about the experiment that was alluded to in one of the earlier sessions of having centralized manufacturing. I think it'll be interesting to see if that really works out. It's obviously been a hurdle for many cell and gene therapy products, and will this experiment of aggregating expertise and then having a group of experts prepare investigational and then commercial material for many different customers, how will that work out? So that's still a hurdle, I think, in my mind. I think that for what I'm most interested in, which are AAV vectors, we have some very exciting preclinical data that looks much more efficient than the first generation of vectors, which were all naturally occurring vectors, look much more efficient, at least in non-human primates. How well is that going to translate into patients? I think that's something that I'm looking forward to. It's been a hurdle. More potent vectors mean a lower cost of goods and a lower manufacturing burden. So those are hurdles I'd like to see us do something about. So.
Boro Dropulik, I wear two hats. I'm the Executive Director of Caring Cross, and I'm also the CEO of a vector manufacturing CDMO called Vectra Biomed. I've been in this space since the late 1980s. I was at the NIH, at Johns Hopkins, and then I started a couple of companies. The first one, we did the very first lentiviral vector clinical trial in collaboration with our UPenn colleagues at the time, established the safety. And then later I started a company called Lentigen, where we made the vector that eventually became Kymriah, the first FDA-approved product. And a number of years I spent in collaboration, Lentigen and Miltenyi Biotech, focused on decentralized manufacturing, and then moved over to Caring Cross. I think in terms of access, cost is very important. We talk about, the importance of affordability. So one of the things that we're focused on is decrease the unit cost of production of autologous CAR T cells. We're very much focused on that. We're also focused on decentralized manufacturing, enabling a point of care model, working with a collaboration of hospitals, both in this country and overseas, and then also decentralizing the technology, tech transfer. So for one of the things that we're working on is working with the Ministry of Health in Brazil and an organization called Fiocruz, where we're tech transferring them all the manufacturing SOPs for CAR T and lentiviral vectors, so they can make those products locally at about 1/10 of the cost. And then we're doing that in multiple parts of the world. And so where I see barriers of access, cost is very important, but also, in terms of labor, if you have a centralized model, that's going to be always a higher level of labor cost than if you decentralize and make things locally.
My name is Ignacio Núñez. I'm the CEO of CellReady. CellReady is a Jurex-centric CDMO in Houston, Texas. Our vision is to structurally reduce the cost of cell therapy by deploying standards and by unlocking the potential of what we believe is one of the most efficient reactors for cell therapy, the Jurex. I've been 20 years in operations and manufacturing. I've worked for companies including Novartis during the launch of Kymriah, Johnson & Johnson, University of Pennsylvania. Well, I agree with Boro. I think we had to focus definitely on cost. We had to structurally reduce the cost. We had to find the right drivers to do so. In my mind, we had to find the right standards. It seems that everybody believes that they have something that is so confidential that they should not share it. And the truth of the matter is 80% of all the processes are exactly the same, identical, especially when you're talking about cell therapies and depending on what platform you're using. So maybe you have 20-30%, which is just secret sauce, but other than that, 80% could be already standardized. So if we were able to find those right standards and make them available to the community, so when you have a phenomenal technology, phenomenal science that is working, you can advance that very inexpensively and very, very fast from preclinical to clinical right away because you are using standards that have been developed over and over and over. I think that will be a huge step forward in reducing the cost and advancing these therapies and make them accessible for patients. Now, in relation to those standards, what I see is just, companies really, really struggle to understand what is working and what is not working, simply because there is no sharing across the board, right? I think if we were able to find that library of standards that you can use for your IND, for example, and then they work and you can get them at no cost, that would be a huge step forward for the whole industry.
Right. And Terry, when we were prepping for the panel, you were talking about, and we have made so much progress, and Peter Marks is so forward-leaning in getting these therapies, and so is Nicole Verdun. But you were also talking about how the previous therapies that have been approved kind of set a standard for the perception of these therapies and how that can sometimes perhaps be a barrier.
Yeah, I mean, SMA was such an amazing therapy. I mean, you had children that were, going to be gone in 2 years and they were running around at 10. And I think that set such a high bar for everybody. I mean, an example is in my son's disease, we're hoping to slow down or stop the disease. And I think that's a win. But what does that win mean? Does that mean that, he's going to stop from becoming paralyzed? And if we're lucky, maybe we'll see some cognitive improvements. But that in the viewpoint is not such a big win, and maybe is more difficult to get approved. And I think that's where I think we kind of set the bar too high. And I think we need to kind of set the expectations that in some diseases we're going to slow them down, some diseases we're going to stop the disease, and other diseases we're going to be completely curing these children. And I think that's where, in our case, we treated a 5-month-old, which I think is one of the youngest children to ever be treated intrathecally. That child is doing significantly better than we expected. And I think that going forward, the younger we treat these patients, the better hope they'll have for moving that bar from cure to treatment or treatment to a cure. The challenges I see, again, funding is a big challenge. The ability for us to have a true pipeline approach, not just talking about a pipeline, but actually creating one and then saying, you don't have to do this specific item in that pipeline. Being able to, what I call, in the IT field, we would iterate on things. You would iterate and make things better. I think the manufacturing field needs to be able to do that as well. Initial products were $1 million or $2 million, but if you can iterate on them and bring them down to $25,000 or $50,000, that will help the entire field out. And then access. I think access is going to be extremely difficult, and I think we need to figure out how do we get access in diseases to all the children and all the patients.
And Kathy, could I go back to from the regulatory and the FDA perspective when we talked, and your experience in terms of how have you seen that evolve?
Well, I'd like to follow up on something that Terry said about that you get, when you take all comers with a genetic disease, you get a range of results. And obviously, for most genetic diseases, not for all of them, but for most of them, the earlier you intervene, the better the result. And so products are approved on the range of results that you get when you access a broader group of the patient population. But eventually, after all the prevalent patient population has been treated and you fall to the incident population, you get better and better results. So I think that's one of the challenges that everyone has to deal with. But it's good to know what is the range of results that you will get, and probably some people fall outside the range. Their disease is sufficiently advanced that they fall outside the range so that they can really be helped by gene therapy. In terms of strategies for very rare diseases, I do think that there is always the option of a perpetual IND, and I know that may be unsatisfying to you, but it is a possibility. And, I think that I personally feel that it was a good thing that the Office of Cell and Gene Therapy, which now has another name, the Office of, but I think it was a good thing that they tried to set a high bar for safety and efficacy at the beginning. It was a new class of therapeutics. Many people were skeptical about it. And I think that it only served the field well that the regulatory agencies were setting a high bar. So that's sort of my perspective on at least the beginning.
Yeah, no, I'll just add to, I totally agree with you. I think the bar for safety has to be set extremely high. If we have a lot of deaths in the field, we're going to be setting ourselves back generations. And I think that bar has to be set. And I think the endpoints, when you look at, having to do a natural history study, so you usually find older patients, unfortunately, and then treating those patients, and then finding their siblings, which then brings the age down, so we're able to treat those patients, which every sibling that we find that's under 1 year old, we attempt to treat them. But then it's the chicken and the egg. Until you get on a drug approved, you're not on the newborn screening panel, so then you can't catch them early enough.
Exactly.
That's the dilemma, and that's where we're trying to fix, but it's a long hurdle.
I mean, you made a really good point about, we experienced this as well, and it's a lesson in terms of your business model projections. Is your first 2 years, 2.5 years, it's your prevalence, and then what is your infrastructure for the incidence? And that's what investors want to know. And I'll tell you, because it was my team's responsibility to go out and try to partner to get newborn screening enacted, and then during the investor calls, they would start asking VAs, what's the status of the newborn screening and how far, what other countries have been adopted? Because that provides a more predictable business model of going forward, but it's very difficult to do.
Yes.
Newborn screening is very difficult to do, and I would say to recommend to build that into your planning very, very early, because we will have programs in our pipeline say, well, we'll get newborn screening. Yeah. Not necessarily. Right.
Yeah. And, but it's extraordinary if you think where newborn screening was in 2000 and 2001. We've made such enormous strides, and it's so much more feasible than it was then. But as you say, for each new disease, it's another series of 50 battles.
Right.
In the United States.
And globally, and maybe we'll evolve to have more, genetic screening and sequencing more readily available, and we can evolve to that. It could be a whole nother different discussion. Thank you for that. So in terms of, Ignacio, when we were having the conversation, you mentioned the term industrializing our industry.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a very hopeful concept. Could you expand on that? And we can hear from the panel in terms of, what do we think that looks like going forward?
Yeah, so people talk about manufacturing, right? But I think depending on what your background is, the meaning of manufacturing in your head is different. All right, so let's start by defining, at least in my head, what manufacturing is. Manufacturing is when you really start the scale up, somewhat closer to your GMP, right? Before it's lab. You could call it manufacturing, but that is not really, it's such a small scale that I don't think that is something that you can really, copy paste into mass production manufacturing facility once that you jump into GMP, right? So if we start from the point that, manufacturing, let's call it GMP, is the scale up, is when you are ready to really cookie cutter start repeating over and over a process that theoretically works. One thing that I see over and over is that you have a technology that is working in the lab and you're trying to copy paste 100% that into a mass production manufacturing facility, assuming that the critical success factors that you have in a lab are the same critical success factors that you have in a manufacturing facility. And it's not like that at all, right? So what happened is, we have a huge problem of underutilization of our manufacturing capability. So we don't have a problem of the amount of manufacturing facilities that we have dedicated to cell therapy or gene therapy for that matter, but we have a problem of underutilization. In my mind, I believe we utilize our manufacturing facility less than 30%. And that is simply because we have processes that are not designed for mass production. We have processes that were designed for a lab. And the lab have a specific critical success factor like safety, efficacy, right? But they are not defined for flexibility, throughput, cost contention, repeatability, which is what you need when you industrialize, right? Another thing is processes are extremely complicated, really complicated. You have multiple media exchanges. You have many process steps. You have open processes. You have really complex samples testing. You want to have samples and information throughout the entire process. Why? Right? You have to stop your production to do that. So all that is adding up. And eventually you have a process that is extremely hard to manage with a lot of variation. And yeah, the costs go to the roof. Right? So one of the things that I believe we should do in order to structurally reduce the cost of cell therapy is deploy standards. But those standards have to be deployed by looking into your processes and reducing the complexity of your processes, reducing the process step, closing the system, reducing the amount of samples that you take, reduce the amount of media exchanges that you make. And by doing so, you will reduce eventually your cost of cell therapies. Now, I see a lot of people jumping into automation. Is automation the future? Yeah, potentially, but it's not going to solve your issues. Automation is not the solution to your problems, because if you have a lot of problems and you jump into automation, guess what? You're going to have the same problems, but now automatic, right? So fix your problems first, and then maybe you jump into automation. But for example, at CellReady right now, together with Boro, we are developing a new CAR-T process that is so simple, close, extremely fast, extremely efficient, that, to be honest, automation is a nice to have. We can definitely do it, but it's a nice to have because the cost of labor and overhead is almost nothing. So that's what I mean with industrialization. And I believe if somebody asks me, what is the future of cell therapy or gene therapy for that matter, I think we should bring real manufacturing people. And that may be a little controversial, but you have industries out there that have been around for over 100 years, medical devices, traditional pharma, food industry, and they have the same issues that we have in cell therapy, very, very similar, and they have fixed them many years ago. In cell therapy, we are learning in the job, spending a lot of money, learning on the job instead of bringing people who may have a little more experience in manufacturing, who have seen all those issues, have fixed those issues. So we're going to accelerate the development of those therapies.
And I have a follow-up question, but then I would love for you to also speak to this. Dasha, how are you finding the regulators evolving in this direction? Ignacio?
I think he's asking.
Oh, sorry.
How are you finding regulators globally evolving in this direction?
Well, I think they're really on board in the sense that anything that reduces complexity is easier to approve, right? Because that when you have less chances to make a mistake, it's easier to show proof of standardization and that you have your process in control. Further, if you have a process that is closed versus open, you are reducing massively the potential contamination issues and the lab failures, right? We have clients that came from big CDMOs, they have a manufacturing failure of 75%, right? That's 3 out of 4 batches that fail. And that is one of the reasons because it was open, right? So anything that is a standard, that means that if you go to the regulators and you show the standards and you show that those standards have been applied to other therapies already, you say, oh yeah, this is the standard that we are using here or there. Obviously, it's much easier to approve rather than bringing something totally new that they may or may not feel comfortable with.
Right.
Yeah, I agree with Ignacio. I think it's very key to simplify the process, whether it's automated or not automated. You can do a lot, even without automation, to simplify the process. Decreasing the cost of materials. One of the reasons we established Vectra Biomed, a public benefit corporation, is to actually really develop new processes and really reduce the cost over half-fold compared to the existing processes. So that's very important, reducing the material cost, reducing the time decreases the labor and the facility costs per unit product produced. Right, and that further decreases the cost. And then that opens things up to centralized and decentralized and point-of-care manufacturing. Because when you have a short process that's simple, it becomes very portable as long as you use the same materials, the same devices, right? And when it becomes portable, right, that means you can actually use local labor to produce the product, further decreasing the cost in low middle income countries. And that's how you actually get more accessibility and adoptability of these products. And so that's, I think, very important to put all those pieces together and to create workflows and opportunities for improved accessibility. And then teaching. The other thing is that a lot of these processes are standard. Many of the vectors and cell processing are standard. We're aligning along procedures that are becoming standard in the industry. It's important to teach, particularly in low middle income countries, so they can make these products, use their local skilled labor to produce these products at a much lower cost and treat their patients. Because I agree with on the previous panel, we're marked by how many patients we treat.
Great. So Kathy and Terry, in terms of being in your startup hat from the clinical side, moving into towards commercialization, how is the evolution or thinking about the evolution of manufacturing in this direction?
So, sorry, I'm not sure I got the question.
So if you're in a startup and you're thinking about startup and you're in the clinical moving to commercialization from your clinical manufacturing, how should we be thinking about that?
Well, so first of all, we're doing an ophthalmic indication, which means that our requirements for vector are pretty low. Mm-hmm. So I think that commercialization is a very complicated topic. As you know, the cost of goods is only one of many factors that are considered in pricing and reimbursement. And the cost of making AAV keeps dropping. I think the most straightforward commercialization cases are where there's already a very expensive, let's say, recombinant protein on the market, and you just do a simple, straightforward math. If I'm getting 10 years of expression and people are already paying $400,000 a year for the recombinant protein, how much can I charge. You know? And there was a point at which I was afraid that the gene therapy would be focused only on things that were already had products out of another class of therapeutics, because it was so much more straightforward to set pricing and reimbursement in that circumstance. And so I think that a challenge for the field is, what are you going to do about diseases for which people develop a one-time therapy, and right now we don't do anything, right? So it doesn't cost the healthcare system anything. And how are we going to set prices there? How are we going to set fair prices for a one-time therapy where right now we're not paying anything in the healthcare system, in the health insurance industry in the United States? So I think it's always a little easier discussion in Europe, where people realize that to the extent that individuals are unable to work or unable to support themselves, that eventually taxpayers are paying for that. So just like they pay for new treatments that may enable people to live independently, that if they don't do that, they're going to be paying in another way. Here in the United States, it's a different situation. So
That's right. It's definitely a barrier, and it's definitely a place for continued innovation.
Yes.
Together. I didn't know if you had anything else to add.
Yeah, I mean, for us, we're trying to do phase 3 studies, like 1-3 studies from the very beginning. So we're trying to get commercial product from the very beginning, and we're lucky that we have a really good partner through Biogen in Spain, who's been making us commercial product and getting us ready. Kathy mentioned something which was very interesting, and leaving an open IND. And I think that as long as the costs keep going down in manufacturing, and we get to a certain number, like eye disease, you're lucky you can make a batch and it'd be enough for every child ever to be treated. In those situations, you open up a clinical trial, you leave it open forever, and you do expanded access around the world, and it's an easier path. When the drug product costs about $500,000 a patient, it's more difficult, because then the families have to raise that money. But if it comes down to $5,000, leave an open IND, potentially forever, treat every child in these rare conditions anyways. But again, right now, because of the process, because of the cost, because of all these situations, our path is phase 1-3, get a commercial product immediately, show efficacy as quickly as you humanly can, get expedited approval, use the PRV to then expedite further programs.
Exactly. Yes. Your perspective is very helpful. So I wanted to see if we had any questions from for the panel, and then we will allow them to just do a closing comments on what they hope for the future. Do we have any questions that you want to ask our panel? What's happening? Okay, while you're thinking, I will ask them what's your hope for the future? And across each of the stakeholders that we work with, the hope for our industry as we move forward. And Terry, we could start with you.
Yeah, well, I hope we get warmer weather for
Yes.
in both Texas and in the market right now in the biotech field. I hope that the new administration comes in and offers more hope and brings in more funding for rare diseases. I mean, there's a lot of families I see in the room that are working to make a therapy, and right now there's literally nowhere to go. There's no funding at all for families. Like when I did it, there was no grants to apply to. I think we need more of that, some more innovation. And the reason is that with these ultra-rare conditions, if we can get 10, 20, 100, 1,000 of them out there, it'll help the entire field, especially for disease with multiple genes that are affected. And I think what Lynn was saying, which is having investors that are looking at alternative funding mechanisms and alternative company ideas is really important, because we're not going to get there with in rare diseases with the 50, 100 million, $1 billion investments. We need to start off with these small investments to get us to the clinic, get us to commercialization, and bring more products out there. So I'm hoping that things turn around so that we can actually have real investment in ultra-rare conditions.
Perfect. You too.
So I think we have to separate a little bit gene therapies, like for example, rare diseases, ultra-rare diseases, and then cell therapies that primarily are focusing on oncology, because here we have an enormous volume of potential patients that we had to address. So I think there are two things, right? So we were focusing a lot of manufacturing, but in my mind, patient accessibility is probably the biggest bottleneck. I was reading some stats before the event. I think is 36,000 patients have been treated in last 15 years with CAR-T, 36,000. While there are over 1 million patients with blood cancer that died a year, right? So when you think about it, 36,000 in 15 years versus 1 million just in blood cancer that died a year, there is a huge disconnect. There is a huge disconnect there, right? So that is item number one, right? And then another thing is, okay, it's called for cell and gene therapies in relation to funding. I get that. But I also see very positively because I believe maybe not so much in gene therapy, but in cell therapies, I believe this is a first cycle of continuous improvement that was long overdue. Every industry has gone through multiple cycles of continuous improvement in which the whole industry recalibrates, deploy the standards, and then sharing those standards, and what everybody start adopting those standards is when the cost goes down and then expands to everywhere, right? So I want to believe that it's that continuous cycle will bring an end-to-end continuum of goodness for everybody. So while some people may see this negative because there is not a lot of money coming in, I think it's a learning. Regretfully, some companies may not make it. But I believe the ones that do will be better positioned to be successful and deliver life-saving therapies to patients.
To see improved access to underserved populations, both in this country and including those in low middle income countries. And I think that we have the tools and the pathways and the models available to us to test, right, to see which ones work, which ones don't work. They'll sort themselves out in time. And I think we have that capability. We just, I think, need to have the courage to move forward and test them out and see what we can do. But I think we have everything we need.
I agree. I would just say that we always said never underestimate a country.
Well, I'm excited about three things over the next decade. One is I'm excited about these novel biosynthetic AAV capsids. Susan in her talk mentioned the Novartis acquisition of KMAK. These are capsids that appear to have 30-fold higher activity than the ones that are currently used to transduce skeletal muscle. That's a real game changer, not only in terms of efficacy, but in terms of cost of manufacturing, cost of goods. So it's not just Kate, right? Apertura, Lattice, Capsida, there are multiple companies that have been focusing on one target tissue or another to get better capsids that have greater potency. So I'm excited about that for AAV. I'm excited about the extension of gene therapy and cell therapy too to complex acquired disorders, not single gene disorders, but actually I think in the next decade we'll probably see the first approvals for complex acquired disorders that affect many thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of patients, disorders like Parkinson's disease, heart failure, and so forth. So I'm excited for age-related macular degeneration. So I'm excited for that. And last but not least, I think it's going to be interesting to see how gene editing, gene therapy, base editing, and so forth sort out as therapies of choice for particular indications. That's going to be an interesting series of maneuvers to watch. And I think it's great because it will really increase the therapeutic armamentarium, and people will advocate for one or the other, and one of them or other will win in the marketplace. And so I think we have a lot of interesting things going on.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I share your enthusiasm, and also thank you all for sharing your expertise and also for your leadership in the industry and pushing forward and founding and making sure that we can still continue to get our therapies to the patients that need them. And we really do believe the future is bright as well. So why don't we thank our panelists, and thank you for your time.